Another song from somewhere else. Chapter 4. After breakfast, she knew she was going to go back to Nick's house. She had no choice. Her heart was uneasy with how she'd treated him. She'd lied to him yesterday when she said she'd seen nothing in the cellar. He knew she'd heard the music, so why had she lied about what she'd seen? Because he'd be angry, she thought, about her sneaking around his house without asking. But maybe she'd have to face that anger in order to understand what was going on. Now, after she'd seen him in the basement, seen him seeing the same thing she was seeing, she knew she couldn't pretend nothing had happened. It was clearly his secret, but she knew too, and it was unfair of her not to let him know that she knew, wasn't it? And what about what Quintus Minuta said? All that stuff about other worlds and shadows, and it was hard to remember exactly what the cat had said. Come the morning, it was misty in her mind like a dream, even though she knew it happened, hadn't it? Oh, it was all tangled up in knots. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to be friends with him. She didn't, truth be told, want all the weirdness, but she did want to hear the music, and she did want him to like her. There was something special about him, about his house. She didn't have a choice, did she? She told her dad where she was going and got on a bike. Frank turned the corner into the park with the usual questions fogging her brain. Would they be there? They were. Neil, Noble, and not only Rob and Roy, but half a dozen other lads too. They were sat in the park with a pair of dropped jumper goalposts, kicking a football back and forth. For a moment she hoped, with no real hope in the hoping, that the presence of the other boys who'd never have been mean to her, some of whom she'd never even seen before, might hold Noble in check. Her anti-hope instincts, however, were correct. As she pushed off with one foot and pedalling down the path as fast as she could, she heard the wispy, hateful version of her name rolling over the grass. Francesca! And then, with an unnatural aim and a hollow sound like a gymnasium, the ball hurled out from nowhere and hit her back wheel. The bike wobbled, skidded, and slid out from under her, and she went tumbling across the tarmac and onto the dry, dusty, summer-worn grass. The bike clattered away from her, pedals banging on the path, a faint ding from the unrung bell hanging in the air. There was laughter, and through the stinging pain she heard her name coming closer. Francesca, Francesca, are you all right? Where'd you learn to ride a bike? Clown school? You okay? What an idiot. There was a crowd of them around her. They kept blocking and unblocking the sun as they moved about. It flickered in her eyes like an interrogation. She had the impression some people were holding hands out for her, but all she could hear was the laughter, the jeer of Neil and his pals. Cut it out, Neil, one boy said. She came right cropper there. Look at her knee. Don't worry about that. Francesca's not afraid of a little blood. Noble sneered. Are you? Her knee stung. Looking down, she saw it was grazed. Deep red blood poured dark in the cut, and she felt sick and pale and clammy seeing it. She pushed her way to her feet. There was blood in her hands too. You okay? Someone asked. Maybe the boy who just spoken. Of course she's not, Dumbo. Noble sneered. Look, she's still breathing. Rob and Roy grunted approval at this. Now come on, Neil, that's not nice. Noble turned to the boy he'd been playing football with a minute earlier and pushed him backwards with both hands. What's wrong, Johnny? He simpered, battling his eyelashes and nibbling fingertips between words. Is you in love with the little? Frank took his opportunity to pull her bike upright and lean on the handlebars. It rolled forward. The back wheel went all the way round. She threw a leg over and scrambled her feet onto the pedals. Blood dripped down her shin. It was warm and dripping on her foot as she pedalled. Behind her, the two boys were scuffling on the grass. Someone kicked the football at her, but this time it missed, rolling alongside her for a while until she turned with the path, skirted the wreck, and zoomed out the park's other entrance. Frank was breathing heavily and still pedalling fast as she could to approach Nick's house. She was afraid no one of his pals would have finished their scribbling in the park and have started following her. Those sort of things never lasted long. when there were tastier prey around. It was just boys showing off, being idiots. She freewheeled to a stop, her heart slowing as she saw Mr. Underbridge in the street. He was helping a man in brown overalls put packages into the back of the van. "Morning, Frank," he said, when he saw her. Then he noticed her pale face, her bleeding knee, her bloody leg. "Are you okay? What happened?" he asked, coming over and bending down beside her. "I fell off," she said, not tearfully, telling all the truth that needed to be told. "Nick's in the house somewhere," he said. "Take your bike round the back and just go into the kitchen. Shout for him. I'll be in there in a second." He turned to the man, who was straightening one long, flat, bubble-wrapped package against the others in the back of the van. "Bill," he said, "there's only a few more in the hallway. You okay getting them yourself? I'll be back in a minute." Frank walked her bike up to the side of the house and round to the back. As she lay it down on the grass, she glanced at the cellar windows. The overgrown grass in front of them looked flattened a bit. The windows seemed cleaner, or at least less cobwebby. "What happened to you?" Nick asked, coming out the back door. "I fell off my bike," she replied, and said no more. They went into the kitchen. Nick's dad had already got a green first aid box out of the cupboard. "You'd better wash your knee," he said. She ran the hot tap and tore off some kitchen paper. Once the blood was cleaned away, the graze didn't look so big after all. The blood in her hand had been from her knee, not from another cut. She still felt a little sick, but sitting down helped. Mr. Underbridge held her leg firmly as he dabbed it with antiseptic, found the plaster just the right size and shape, and stuck it over the wound. She noticed that his nails were unevenly cut and speckled with multicolored paint. He didn't speak as he did it, just got on with the job. The man with the van, Bill, called for him from the front house. "You're okay now, yeah?" he asked. "I've got to go and do some work." Frank and Nick sat at the kitchen table. Nick had made some squash, and they sipped at their glasses. It was nice just to be quiet for a bit, Frank thought. "I didn't know if I'd see you today," Nick said evenly. "I mean—" He let the words hang in the air. Frank had a feeling she'd had when she first met at the wreck, although she hadn't thought of it in quite the same way before, a feeling that he was older than he seemed. He talked sometimes, like a grown-up, not one of the stupid, annoying ones, but like one from a movie, like someone who knows their lines. The map she drawn the day before, the one with the pirate island, was stuck to the front of the fridge with a cat-shaped magnet. She drank the rest of her squash all in one go. It was cool and refreshing. Ice cubes clinking against the side of the glass fell against her lips as she dripped the last drops into her mouth. They were numbing, stinging, but she didn't feel sick anymore. Even the ache in her knees seemed to be fading away. She put the glass down. "I didn't tell her the truth yesterday," she said, not knowing how else to begin. Nick didn't say anything. "About the cellar." She nodded at the door behind Nick. "When I was down there, it was because I just sort of felt I had to." This was hard to explain. The words didn't sound true, but what words would work better? She stumbled forward. "It was weird. I know I should have asked first. I knew I should have asked, but I couldn't help myself. I wanted to hear the music better. I had to. It made me listen, made me follow it." She chuckled nervously, shaking her head and looking away. "And then, when I was down there, I saw something, but I'd tell you that I hadn't seen something. I'm sorry. I didn't know why I lied. I didn't want you to be mad. And you've been so kind. And I know I shouldn't have gone down there, not without asking you first. I'm sorry, Nick." He sat there, staring at her. His fingers tapped on the table as if they were practicing a new nervous little dance for the big show Saturday night. "How are you feeling?" he asked suddenly, pointing at her knee. "Better," she said. "A bit better, thanks." "Do you play swing ball?" "What?" "Swing ball. Dad set one up in the garden last summer. It's a bit boring playing by yourself. He doesn't have time usually." She followed him out into the sunlight and fresh air. In the middle of the lawn was a tall metal pole with a tennis ball attached to it by a long piece of cord. It slid round and round on a spiral metal at the top. She knew this game, but hadn't known what it was called. It was exactly the sort of thing Jess didn't like to play. They took a plastic racket each and started knocking the ball back and forth. The pole glinted in between them. "What did you see?" he said after a bit. "I don't know, not exactly. There was this thing, like a troll and ogre or something, like something from a story or a movie or a comic, and it was making music. It was a huge, ugly, It was huge and ugly, and had a computer or keyboard, and there was moss growing behind his ears, and it was dressed in a toga like a Roman or something. It was making music, Nick. That beautiful music came from this monster, like Beauty and the Beast. And then it saw me, and the music stopped, and it said something. I don't know if it liked me being there, because it grumbled and rumbled, but I didn't understand. Nick laughed, hit the ball hard with a thwack. Yeah, he said. She's like Dad. She doesn't like to be disturbed when she's working. And you must have surprised her. She doesn't see many strangers. A blanket of warm summer snow fell over the garden when Nick spoke, making everything seem friendly again, fresh and clean and welcoming. Frank felt better for having said what she said, or rather, she felt better for having said what she said and not having Nick throw her out or get mad. Have you worked out who she is? He asked. No, she said, knocking the ball back. What do you mean, who she is? Who is she? After a moment's hesitation, during which Nick hit the ball and Frank hit it back, he said, You know, I said my mum wasn't here. How it's just me and Dad here. Yeah, well, that's sort of true. But it's also sort of not true. It's complicated, and I really reckon you wouldn't believe me. When I said it out loud, it just sounds mad. I've never told anyone before. I've not really had anyone to tell. He stopped talking, hit the ball, and watched it spin around on its spring until Frank knocked it back. The troll? She asked. That's my mum, said Nick. Oh, said Frank. Obviously, said her stomach, rolling its eyes. She hit the ball back again and said nothing. There's these other worlds, you see, he said, other universes, and it's to do with maths and physics and everything, but something they touch, they bump against each other, and when they do, sometimes something can get through, and that was what I was told. What do you mean? She said. In the cellar, he said, nodding towards the windows Frank had lain beside last night, down there where another world touches this one. It's like when they touch, a window opens, and you can see through it for a bit. Then they move apart a little, and it disappears again. She thought of Quintinus Minimus. What was it that Cat had said last night? Something about other worlds, something about trouble, and about danger, about shadows. She swung and missed the ball as it sailed towards her, then it away, and Nick batted it back for her. This was odd. She'd never known a boy whose mum lived in a different world before. If he'd just told her this, without her having seen what she'd seen, without her having heard that unearthly, breath-catching music, she wouldn't have believed him. Of course not. She would have laughed awkwardly and tried to get away. But she had seen, she had heard the music. She knew Nick was telling her the truth. Still, muttered her stomach, not liking what it was hearing, maybe you should run just be on the safe side. And that's where I come from. That's how I got here, he said. I got lost when I was a baby. I found myself on the wrong side of the window. I was found on the wrong side, on this side. But, said Frank, not thinking of enough words to finish the thought. It was an accident, Nick said. Dad says I must have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The worlds banging together, and somehow I popped through. Dad was drawing late one night, and then he heard crying and thought it was television, except he doesn't own a television set back then. So he went down into the cellar and found me there, wrapped up and wriggling, and the window had shut and vanished before he got there. There was nothing there. He found nothing down there but a fat, confused baby. You. Yeah, me. She knocked the ball back, and he missed it, and she hit it harder as it went past again, sending it zooming down the coiled spring towards the bottom, towards her winning end. What did he do? He did what any dad would do. He took me in. He looked after me. It was funny, Frank thought, how easy it was to talk about all this stuff. Now they were doing something. Now they had to concentrate on the ball. They slipped the words in between the batting, and the pole stood between them like a safety curtain. How did you work out that was where you came from? Did he tell you? Did the window open again? Frank asked. I think it was the music, Nick said. It was the music that first took me down there. I was only little, 3 or 4 maybe, and didn't know about any of this stuff. But I think I can remember hearing it coming up from the floor, and it was like being called home. like a good smell that loops in your nose and pulls you along like you're floating. At least, I think that's what it was like. It's a long time ago. It's hard to remember. It's different now. I mean, now it's just is what it is. I can't think what it would be like if the music wasn't there. Frank could hear the faint echo of the music in her own head. She was playing the music for me, Nick went on, playing it to say, it's all right, really. I knew who she was the moment I saw her. I just knew it. I had not had a mother before, and suddenly I did. It was simple. She was beautiful, and she smiled at me, but sadly, And now, whenever I'm sad, she plays her song to make me feel happy again. It's her way of kissing things better. The only way she has now. This window, this other world, Frank said, fascinated. Do you go through? Do you go through to there? It's a Turkish delight on the other side, added her stomach. Are there talking animals and a wicked witch? He's having you on, Frank. That's all rubbish. Aunt Mimi tried to explain it to me once, Nick said. When he saw Frank's questioning face, he added, she's a sort of a friend of my dad's, not a real aunt or anything. She knows loads about science and stuff. She used to babysit me sometimes when I was little. She's the one who explains it to us, explained about the other worlds. She's the only other person who knows about this. About me. Well, apart from you now. Frank felt herself blush as she batted the ball back. She was one of just 4 people, and a cat, she guessed, in the whole world who knew this. But at the same time, she was the only one of only 2 people who knew about the lucky pine cone Jess kept in the back of her sock drawer. But that secret just didn't seem quite as interesting now. Frank remembered how Quintinus Minimus had said people were searching for the window. She held Nick's secret tight to her chest. Super secret. Aunt Mimi told us that when the 2 worlds bang together, a window opens between them for a moment. It became a door, you might say, but then it closed again, Nick said. I popped through the first time, but now it's shut. Somehow, though, that bang is still echoing, still bouncing, and each time it echoes, a window appears, but only sound gets through now, only light. Each bounce or echo is softer than the one before. Eventually, maybe, it'll stop. We won't be able to see the window at all. I don't know. It's to do with energy and stuff. I don't really understand, but the fact is, I'm stuck here, and she's stuck there. Oh, said Frank. That was such a sad thought. She knew how she'd felt laying in bed on the nights her mum was away for business. How it just added to her loneliness. To imagine her mum being trapped in another world, unable to touch her at all, and then she thought of something else. Oh God, Nick, she blustered. I didn't mean to be rude. I didn't mean anything by it, but I called her a troll. I didn't know she was your mum. It's just she's big and, well, trollish looking. I didn't mean... Her stomach said nothing, but Nick just laughed. Hit the ball so it span around twice before she could even miss it. Do you remember those stories you were told as kids? He said, seemingly changing the subject. Those old stories that had elves and goblins and ogres in. Stories about babies being stolen by fairies, or those ones where little girl goes for a walk and comes back home only to find 100 years had passed by. She nodded. The stories she hadn't believed in, stories she'd never thought they were actually supposed to be true. Fairy tales. Aunt Mimi said that's what's happened to me, and what happened to me means what's happened to them. A world bumps against one another hard enough, and something pops through. It could be a person from here goes there, or a thing from somewhere else ends up here. And if someone from another world, where everyone is small, gets stuck here, people might think that they are a pixie or a gnome or something. Might they? Might they? Frank nodded. She understood. Where I'm from, everyone is just a bit bigger than here, that's all. I guess it's the world where trolls and ogres and giants come from, But that's not for definite. It might be people just made the stories up after all. Who knows? He laughed again. But look at me. I'm massive. I'm the biggest in the school. I've always been the biggest in the class, haven't I? I take after her, obviously. I'm clearly from somewhere else. It makes sense. Are you going to start growing? Frank asked. I don't know, he said, shrugging. I'm in another world now. Maybe things will be different here. She kicked the ball with a racket badly, and it lost momentum, fell towards the pole, hardly circling at all. Nick leant forward, chipped it up, caught it in his hand, and began again. I'm sorry, she said. No worries, he said. No, she said, not for that. She pointed at the ball with her racket. I'm in for everything else. I'm in for sneaking around your house, for sticking my nose in, for being nosy and not telling you the truth straight away, for not trusting you." "That's okay," he said. "How's your knee?" She'd forgotten about it, but now it began to throb slowly, not hurting, but just letting her know that it was still there. "It's okay," she said. "Thanks." Nick hit the ball again while she was distracted, and it flew off the top where the catch was broken and bounced somewhere into the bushes. Frank had lost. As Nick lumbered off to fetch the ball, she asked, "How come I can't hear her now?" He pulled the tennis ball out of the undergrowth by its string. "I never know when she's going to be there," he said. "She's there most days. Sometimes she comes in the night. It's not exactly regular. Sometimes she's already playing her music when I come home from school. I like that. It makes the day good when that happens. But it's these bouncing universities, Frank. They bump together on their own timetable. I never know."